Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the re-release of the USS Springfield by Renwal under the Renwal Blueprint series. It's a skill level 4 kit and is 1 in 500 for scale. The kit contains over 100 parts molded in light gray, and there are water slide decals and paper signal flags. The kit itself has seen multiple releases since its original 60s release, and Renwal included the decals only for the USS Springfield No. 7 in this kit. The overall construction is very nice, is straightforward, and the build goes together well. But as this is an older mold design, you'll need to take your time and test fit the parts, remove any flash and pin marks that you find. Final dimensions of the kit are 14 3/4 inches long, 1 1/2 inches wide, and 5 inches high. With some modifications for authenticity, as you can see, this model turns into a pretty good representation of the USS Springfield. Now, we'll be using Tamiya paints, some XF1 black, XF2 white, the XF whole red, XF dark gray, and an XF neutral gray, as well as an XF dark yellow. All of those are flats, and they make this model stand out perfectly. Here are the decals for this kit. As you can see, they're very colorful and the registry is good. I strongly recommend using some decal setting solution to make it fit those contours, but as always, use the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products mentioned here in the review for your own protection. We'll be using a Model Master liquid cement and some super glue to build this kit, and the construction starts with the superstructure. You get a so-so base of only 6 parts, and most of the parts actually could be modified to represent the real ship. This is really more of a post-war light cruiser, but since nobody else makes anything like it, all you need to do is make some changes for a really good looking representation. Gather the parts for the middle superstructure, and here are the pieces needed to complete it. Now, you'll need to make sure that you sand and fit the parts by pre-fitting very carefully. There's large mold lines, and they'll have to be sanded down and squared up to fit. Complete the superstructure using the instructions. It's pretty straightforward, but you'll need to trim the deck, as the red arrows show here, to fit snug all the way from the end to end. So they can be seen from both sides, so be sure to clean the heavy mold lines off too. Assemble the Terrier missile system and the main guns here. Pull out these parts and test fit the main gun barrels. I had to trim the middle gun barrel so it would sit straight and not splay out on each side. Trim the piece that fits in the turret base and not the barrel itself. Grab the parts to assemble the middle and main superstructures. And again, test fit the parts beforehand and make sure that you sand and square up the pieces that fit together for a good tight fit. If you don't, you're going to have gaps, and it'll look more like a snap together kit than anything else. So be sure to do the very important part of cleanup before you assemble these model pieces. Gather the antenna masts and radar towers. It's just a few pieces, but they still need to be cleaned up, especially of the parting lines. Test fit them again to make sure they line up properly. If not, they'll need to change the angle to mount them properly. Gather these parts along with the 7-piece display base. It's a 60s style basic ball and base structure, and you can paint it any color you like. I used brass for mine. Paint the deck before adding the superstructures and assemblies. It's easier to do that than trying to paint around them. So I used XF60 dark yellow, and the ends are painted Tamiya XF24 dark gray. After you've cleaned up the parts, test fit them again to make sure that they fit properly. Then glue the hull and the deck together, starting at one end and working carefully up to the other end with some super glue for strength to make sure that there's no seam and that it fits into the nacelle. Then use some Tamiya neutral gray to paint the entire ship, and then go back and look for any imperfections, and if you find a few, just take care of those with some repair putty and retouch up the paint. Please note that although the hull can be glued to the deck, all these superstructures and attendant parts are just placed and fitted to make sure that they fit. We won't actually glue them into place until after we paint the hull. You can see here how the Terrier missile system is constructed and mounted, along with the forward structure, and these should fit tightly to the deck, so make sure there's no gaps. Here you can see all the superstructures and attendant parts are mocked up for test fit. So here are the finished Terrier missile and front main gun installations. And note the chopper on the aft deck. It calls for it in the kit, but it also shows the rigging line going from the front mast through the towers and down to the rear crane. Now I left off the rear crane, and the version they're representing in the kit's cranes aren't meant to pick up choppers. It was for the seaplanes, which weren't included. So I removed the rear crane, made a piece to cover up the hole in the aft deck, and then made a rear rigging mount, which wasn't included, from scratch, but it's not that hard to make in the kit. So attach the rigging line to just like on the box cover. The arrows here point to the two holes on the side of the ship that are used to mount the lifeboats, and these were flashed over, so make sure that you clean those up and make available for the posts on the lifeboat stands. Gather these parts to assemble the next step in the instructions, and notice that the rudder and the prop assemblies are attached to the bottom of the hull, but the rudders fit flush to the hull, so you'll need to fill the existing holes and make new mounting holes for the rudders. So don't mount them at an angle because they are parallel to the bottom like the ones shown in this picture. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to remove all the superstructures and parts from the top of the deck and get the boat ready to paint the hull. And notice that you can, at this point, do any touch-ups to the paint that need to be done before we get to that step. Now we're going to paint the hull, and I used some Tamiya 10mm tape to tape the midship line. Just make sure it's pressed down not to get any bleeding under the tape. In fact, I often spray a clear flat spray to keep anything that does go under the tape clear and flat. I prefer to paint the waterline using some tape to mask it off, because if you use a tape line for that, sometimes it may peel off in the future. So this ensures that it will stay perfectly fine. We'll use the darker XF24 dark gray for some final shading applied to the top of the main guns and deck floors as shown in this pic. And also the boots and the doors are painted with the XF flat black for emphasis. Paint the props brass color, and after they've dried, applied them to the shafts. Next we'll be painting and detailing the lifeboats, the flag mast, and the chopper, which will be left off, so I wouldn't use that at all. Pull out the parts to make the display base. It's pretty basic, and with a little seam filler you can use on the spheres to make them kind of seamless looking and a nice finish. You may want to remove the copyright script here. Just sand it off and smooth it over with some putty if needed. Set the spheres into place and finish it off in the color of your choice for your display stand. Now you can add the rest of the small detail pieces to the ship, and then paint the whole thing a semi-gloss using either a semi-gloss paint or some future floor polish to get the ship ready for applying decals. After you've finished the stand in brass or whatever your choice of colors is, add the front mast and the decals along with the ship's anchor. And you can see how painting the gun boots makes it look more realistic here. In the back you can see the waterline applied and the depth marker decals too. The missiles really stand out here, and notice that the cover for where the crane was looks like a large steel plate. That's exactly what probably happened to the refit when they made this a missile carrier. You can see here how the lifeboats should fit onto the hull, and I didn't glue the barrels into the main gun body so that they can be moved up or down for action. Here's a top view of the completed ship, and I use what would be considered hair extensions found at a beauty shop for some fine scale and pretty close to scale rigging for this ship. So that was those were used to go from the top masts to the posts on each end of the ship. After making those few modifications to make this a more correct missile carrier version of the USS Springfield, she'll look great on your shelf. Just make sure that you're using some research to understand the various phases that the ship went through. I found the kit to be a little lacking for detail, and of course parts are designed and made in the 60s from this mold, and they still are. So the box art shows a signal flag, and this was only done for fleet inspections. So I left those off and just shown the U.S. flag. Also the chopper on the box art and the rigging line, you know, they can't be there at the same time. So one or the other had to go, and the rigging is required. So that was the one modification that had to be done. The float planes, of course, are what the catapults and crane were for, so those had to be left off as well. But once you've gotten that out of the way, she's going to look great and be a fairly good historical representation of this subject. We hope that you've liked this step-by-step how to build it review, and so that you don't miss any more of these features, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us on the web at www.rightonreplicas.com and on Facebook as well. Thanks.